Hi everyone, and welcome to this third session organized by ELi Publishing. Can you all hear me? Can you all hear it? Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Doreen. Thank you, Simona. Thank you, Silvia. So, my name is Silvia Petrosillo. I'm the International Marketing Manager here in ELi Publishing. And, well, thanks again for being here. This is our third in live sessions organized this year. And I just wanted to share with you just a few technical information before introducing you to the speaker of today. So this session will be recorded. So if any of your colleagues couldn't make it for today, don't worry. We will be sharing the video. It will be uploaded in the next few days / weeks on our YouTube ELi Multimedia channel. Just follow us, okay? Follow us on Facebook and on YouTube so that all this information will be uploaded very, very soon. Also, by tomorrow afternoon, you will receive the certificate of attendance for you know, any one of you who is joining us now today. So you will receive the certificate in a PDF format in your inbox. So check your inbox. Sometimes the PDF, the certificate, the thanking email with the certificate goes in the spam folder, so just check it as well, okay? And then another important thing is that our guest speaker has kindly put together some documents which you can download before the end of this session. So remember to do it before the end of this session, okay? Basically, you should go under documents. So there's an arrow with the writing handouts, and then if you click it, if you open the menu, you will see this PDF you can download. And this is the handout put together by our speaker. If you are following us through the smartphone, then you need to follow the sheet icon, and then pressing on it, then you will be able to download it. Download the file, okay? What else? Yes, questions and answers. There will be a final questions and answers moment at the end of the session when our speaker end her presentation. However, during the entire presentation, the entire session, we would like you to be active and involved and engaged. Now, you will be asked, basically, we're not talking about, you know, a very high level of interactivity, I have to say, but what our speaker will be asking you will be a few questions from time to time during the session. So remember to write down in the chat or questions box. It depends on where you are accessing this platform from. So if you're accessing us through your PC, it is called questions, okay? If you are following us through a smartphone, you just need to follow the question mark, okay? So be ready, pay attention, okay, because our speaker is ready. Who is she? So I'm very happy and pleased to introduce you to Michelle Worgan. So you will be listening, you will be hearing all about her webinar, which is about fostering inclusion in the English language classroom. Michelle, she's an educator. Hi, Michelle, welcome. Directly connected from Spain, I think. So Michelle is an educator and materials writer specializing in primary English language teaching. She's been in this field for more than 20 years, so she's got a lot of experience. She's also an author and writer. She's also helped us to write, you know, part of our course book. She will soon illustrate it a little bit. She will introduce you a little bit. And she also runs her own teacher development courses for primary ELT teachers through her website, michelleworgan.com. So I think I've said all, even too much. So I'm very pleased, Michelle, to pass on the ball, to give you the floor. Let's see whether your microphone is on.
Yes, thank you, Silvia. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly, perfect. Right. Thank you, and enjoy then the session. I'm here for anything, okay?
Brilliant, thank you. Well, hello everybody, and thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us this afternoon. In this webinar, we're going to explore some strategies that will help us make our classrooms more inclusive spaces so that all of our students feel that they can learn English. Now, I want you to think about a class that you teach. So think for a few seconds about this class and the different students that are in your class. Think about their names and their characteristics that identify them. And think about how they are progressing in their English lessons. Okay, now I want you to choose one of your students. Perhaps one that struggles a little bit with English, or a student that finds it challenging to be in the classroom. I want you to think about how this child feels when they are in their English class with you. So think about this. How do they feel? Can you think of any adjectives that would describe how this child might feel at different points in the lesson? If you'd like to type an answer in the chat box, that's fine, or you can just think about it and keep it to yourself. That's also fine. Sylvia, if anybody does type anything, feel free to read out their ideas.
Yes, with pleasure. So, okay, I can see already some questions, some answers coming in, like the motivated and lost, sad,
Demotivated, lost, yes.
tired, bored, stressed, overwhelmed.
Good
A
one.
sense of frustration.
Yes. So it's likely that the child may feel one of these words that come up now. So we have impatience, confusion, boredom, embarrassment, insecurity, anxiety, frustration, as one of you mentioned before, loneliness, helplessness, and nervousness, as well as many other ideas that you've shared as well. Now, that really isn't great, is it? We don't want our students to be feeling like this. We want our classroom, to be a positive space for all of our students. And to achieve that, we need our classroom to be inclusive. But what is an inclusive classroom? An inclusive classroom is a space which enables all students, all pupils to develop to their full potential and abilities. Inclusive learning accepts and values difference, and it means creating a learning environment that is suitable for everyone. It's a place where each and every student belongs. So that's a definition, quite a long one, of an inclusive classroom. Now, I've divided today's webinar into 3 parts. First, we're going to look at learning differences that students may have, and then we're going to think about how we can make learning more accessible for these students. And finally, I'll talk about the heart and mind approach, which is a feature of the Story Garden, a primary course by ELi that I worked on. And I'll be showing you some examples of activities and things from the course to help present some useful strategies that will help make your classroom a more inclusive place. Now, there's one thing I'd like you to remember as we go through the webinar, and that is that every child is different. Every child in your class is different. So let's think about what we actually do in our English lessons. I'm going to just show you some very simple activities, and I'd like you to think about whether you use these activities in your classroom regularly or typically, and feel free to just type yes or no, or Y for yes and N for no in the chat to say whether you use them or not. And then Sylvia can then tell me what you say. So the first activity is a typical vocabulary activity where the students fill in the missing letters of a word. For example, this one here. Do you use this type of activity in your lessons? Yes or no?
So, yes, regularly. Oh, yes, indeed. I've got a no, but mainly yes. Most of them are yes.
Lots of yeses. Okay.
Yes.
Let's move on to the next one. Copying and completing sentences from the board. Do you have your students do this in class?
Okay, just give me a few seconds. Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. Okay, here I can see them. Yeah, it's more as sometimes answer instead of
Okay.
yeses or no's. Yeah, sometimes.
Sometimes, great. Okay. What about a communicative pair work activity where they ask and answer questions in pairs? For example, what sports do you do? Talk to a friend, this type of activity. You often find it in course books too.
Okay, here the majority of the answers actually says often, very often, but I can see, often, but without success. So it's like it's hard to get pupils to talk, I guess.
Okay, what about writing a story? Do you ever ask your students to write a story? Maybe your older students?
Sometimes, or no, because I can see here a teacher saying it might require a little bit or higher level of competence or writing competence as well. So not often, definitely.
Okay, what about activities with cards, with small cards or pieces of paper cut up, for example, matching words and pictures, or ordering cards, putting them in order to make a sentence, or a card game like Palemonism, which is where you match, you try to find pairs that are the same, or maybe bingo with little cards to cover the spaces.
Yes, I can see here lots of yeses with lots of question mark, exclamation marks. So flashcards, yes, we love them. We use cards, they're cool, they're practical, they're easy to be used. So yes, definitely it's 100% yes here, I can see.
Okay,
well, 90%.
Okay, thanks, Sylvia. What about reading comprehension with a text? Not necessarily a long text, it could just be a short one, maybe in their book, and with maybe questions or gapped sentences that they have to complete, or maybe they have to look for some words in the text and match them to definitions, this type of activity. Do you use any of these?
Yes, pretty often, yes, especially to prepare students for a third-year exam. So this sort of activity, yes.
Okay, and the last one is a physical classroom game. So for example, a ball game where they throw the ball and have to say a word, or a board race where they have to run to the board and write something or draw something, or maybe a running dictation, these types of activities. Do you use these in your class?
Okay, here, okay. I can see a couple of interesting answers in particular. I mean, one is no, I don't organize these activities, but I would like to do it. I'm not sure how to do it. And another teacher is saying that these are really good and engaging activities, but my students are very noisy and my colleagues wouldn't allow us to organize these activities.
Okay, well, that's interesting. But yes, totally understandable as well. We're going to come back to these activities in a minute, but first I want to talk a little bit about neurodiversity and specific learning differences. So here we're using the term neurodiversity to talk about students who learn and process information in different ways. And the term specific learning differences, we're using that to talk about some types of neurodiversity, which you can see here. So we have dyslexia, ADHD, autism, ASD, dyspraxia, and dyscalculia. Now, don't worry if you've not heard of all of these, because we're going to have a quick look at them in a minute. So before we do that, I want to do a quick poll. So this question here, do you think that there are students with learning differences in your class? So you can see the poll now. All you have to do is to choose yes or no. Okay, so if you can do that now, that would be great. So any of these learning differences.
I can see the teachers are voting. Just need to give them a little bit of time, just a few seconds more. Okay, shall I close it? Shall I close the poll? I've got okay.
So can we see the results of the poll, Sylvia?
Oh,
those are the results.
Yeah, yes.
I can't really see them because it's really small on my computer, but I think it says
yes,
100%.
Yes, it does say 100% yes.
Okay, okay. Yeah, it's because, apologies, I can only see this very, very small on my screen, so I couldn't, and my eyesight isn't brilliant. So 100%, okay, so everybody says yes. Well, that's great news because research has discovered that between 15 and 20% of the population is neurodivergent in some way, including about 10% with dyslexia. So if you think about how many students you have in your class, maybe you have 25 or 30 or even 40, it's very likely that you have several neurodivergent students in every class, just from these statistics. So what does that mean for us as teachers? Well, first of all, we need to be aware of the challenges that children with specific learning differences may have. And these include the following characteristics that we're going to look at now, which all affect how and whether learning happens. So we're going to look very briefly at each one. So the first one is working memory. And this refers to the amount of information that we can keep in our mind. So things like remembering a telephone number, something that I struggle with now because I don't, I'm not used to having to remember phone numbers. Or, for example, if I suddenly started to say a really long sentence with lots of unnecessary information in the middle of it that's not important at all, and now you're thinking, Michelle, stop talking, please, because I can't remember what you were saying at the beginning of the sentence, you would need your working memory to remember that first part of the sentence. Now, obviously, students wouldn't have such a long sentence, but this is what we're talking about here. And we use working memory for pretty much everything we do in the classroom. The next one is attention. So this one seems fairly obvious, but it's not just about capturing the student's attention. It's about how long they can stay focused on an activity before their mind starts to wander and move on to something else. Organisation is another thing that students might struggle with. And this can refer to physical organisation, for example, how organised your notebook is or your desk, but also mental organisation. So remembering plans, for example, or knowing the steps in an activity and in which order they need to go, or making sure that you have enough time to get to an appointment or a lesson, these types of things. Time management is another one. It's related to organisation. Do your students struggle sometimes with finishing an activity on time? Do they understand how long it will take them to do something, how long they need? And if they don't have time, are they able to adapt and prioritize the important things? Okay, this is all under time management. Sensory perception refers to the senses and how they affect us. And some students may have extra sensitive senses, and they may get overstimulated in a classroom because, as some of you mentioned before, a classroom can be a noisy place. The classroom might also have bright lights that can be distracting or annoying, or it might have lots of visual distractions, lots of things on the walls, pictures, posters and things, and these things can affect some students too. And speed of processing. This is the time that it takes us to understand and react to something. So when we're using a second language, there will be a delay usually compared to our first language because students need to make sense of the question or the prompt and find the right words to respond. And sometimes students just need a bit more thinking time to process this information. And finally, low self-esteem. This is something that we need to be aware of because it affects many learners with specific learning differences. And the way we feel in class can play a big part in how we learn. So these learners will probably need extra encouragement, and the classroom environment will play a big part in this. So that's something to think about. Now, if we look at those activities again, we can think about these characteristics and think about which ones might be required in each activity. So activities that require a lot of working memory might be number 2, for example, copying and completing sentences from the board. Copying is, although it seems like a simple activity, it isn't that simple because, especially if it's a sentence or a paragraph, students have to look at the board, look at their book, remember where they were in the sentence. What's the last word they have written? Where is it on the board? What comes next? The spelling of each word, etc. There are lots of things that they need to do in that process of just copying. With number 3, a communicative pair work activity, they have to remember the question that their partner asks. They have to remember or think about what they want to say and then how to say it in English. They might be worried about the grammar, the vocabulary, the pronunciation. So lots of different things there too. Writing a story, number 4. Obviously, this is a more complex cognitive task. So there's lots of things that they need to think about. What happens in the story, what happened before, what happened next, vocabulary, sentence structure, and so on. And with reading comprehension, number 6, again, they have to remember what they've read before, especially when there's longer sentences and paragraphs. They need to see how the ideas connect with each other, etc. So very, very heavy on working memory. Oh, I did highlight them. There you are. They're highlighted. So these ones are very heavy on working memory. The next one is attention and focus. The activities that require attention and focus here are, again, copying and completing sentences from the board, as we discussed before. Writing a story, again, a lot of focus is required here. And reading comprehension, locating information, again, a lot of focus. Organizational skills, the pair work activity, because students have to organize themselves in pairs. They have to know when it's their turn to speak, for example. Writing a story, again, requires a lot of organization because it needs to have a series of events in order. A card game, again, it requires some organizational skills and reading comprehension. Time management. In fact, probably all of these activities require time management, but in particular, copying sentences from the board, because it can turn into quite a long task. Some students might take longer than others. The pair work activity requires time management as well. Writing a story, and again, a game also requires this kind of skill, and reading comprehension. Activities that can affect sensory perception, so that may cause problems for a hypersensitive student, could be a pair work activity because it can be quite noisy when everyone is talking in pairs. And also a game, particularly like a team game or a game that requires running or some kind of action, or any game really if it's fun, because again it might be noisy. And for students with lower speeds of processing, I think all of these activities could be problematic because they all require several levels of processing. So those are some general characteristics which affect students, a lot of different students with different learning differences. But we're going to have a quick look at the specific challenges that students with each of these learning differences may have. So for dyslexic students, children with dyslexia will obviously find reading challenging, and writing and spelling, but they may also struggle to learn new vocabulary and to make connections between letters and sounds. So it's worth thinking about these things and the activities that you do, especially the vocabulary, the reading, the copying activities, and so on. Dyspraxia. Children with dyspraxia have coordination problems, physical coordination. And so anything that requires motor skills, fine motor skills or gross motor skills, might be difficult for them. So this could be things like taking their books out of their bags, or cutting out with scissors and things like this. Their handwriting may be difficult to read, and they will find writing difficult. It might take them a long time and a lot of effort. They might have a messy desk because it's just harder for them to keep their things organized. Coordination, and this could be even moving around the classroom, for example. Pronunciation, because some children with dyspraxia might have speech challenges, so it might be difficult for them to pronounce certain words. And finishing on time. The next one is dyscalculia, and this is all related to numbers. So numbers, maths, money, telling the time, dates. All these things can be challenging for someone with dyscalculia. And also sequencing. So they might find it difficult to sequence events in a story, follow a story, or to sequence words in a sentence. Children with ADHD will struggle with concentration and their attention span, and they may move from one activity to another very quickly. They might also find it hard to sit still. They'll stay sitting down and work quietly. And obviously, in some contexts, we might see this as bad behavior, but it's not necessarily intentional. They might also struggle with turn taking in a pair work activity because they find it hard to control their impulses, or taking their turn just to answer a question. They may be always putting up, they may not remember to put up their hand, they may just shout out the answers, these types of things. And students with autism might find communication and interaction difficult, so pair work, group work, things like this. They'll struggle maybe to work with other people. Team games might be challenging for them, role plays, and as we mentioned before, they might be affected by noise in the classroom. And finally, they might find it harder to make friends and have those peer relationships in the classroom, which is so important for all students. So going back to that list of activities, and this time I'm going to ask you to type some numbers into the chat box. Which of these activities do you think students with dyslexia might have difficulties with? So thinking about those things that we mentioned, a student with dyslexia, which activities might they find challenging? So you can just type any numbers into the chat box for each activity.
Okay, so yes, I can see number 1, 2, 4, and 5 are possibly the most chosen one. So 1, 2, 4, and 5. I can see also a few number 6 replies.
Yes, definitely. I think obviously the vocabulary we mentioned, copying and completing sentences, really challenging. Writing a story again. The cards one, possibly, yes. And reading comprehension, definitely. Okay, what about a child with dyspraxia? So this is about physical coordination.
Okay. Well, number 5, 3.
Yes.
And 7, definitely. Number 7, number 5, yeah.
Yes, definitely. And also number 2, because they'll probably find writing challenging, holding a pencil, holding a pen. I mean, it depends on their age as well. But writing a lot, and even drawing actually for some children, they can find that challenging. So yeah. What about a child with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder?
Okay. So in general, all look like all, because they require attention, all of them, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, really just being in a classroom, because the way, usually a classroom works, it requires, well, sitting down for extended periods. Even if you have some, physical games, still there's going to be times when they have to sit down and do some, quiet work. So yes, probably all of them. And what about an autistic child?
Okay, this seems a little bit more difficult. So I can see number 1 and number 7. But no, for example, I can read here number 3, or all except number 7.
Okay, yes. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would say 3 definitely, because it requires working with somebody else, which, not, I mean, all of these things are not true for every single learner. So particularly with autism, every individual is different and has different challenges. But we can say, as a generalization, probably in pair work activities, team activities and things like that will be challenging. And as we said before, noisy activities too. Okay, so we've been thinking about the challenges, but it's also important to remember that neurodivergent students have strengths too. And where possible, we need to include activities that promote these skills, these strengths that they have. So here are some examples of strengths that they may have. Creativity, visualization, problem solving, lateral thinking, empathy, passion, memory, resourcefulness. I think there's one more. Yes, verbal communication skills. So obviously all learners are not going to have all of these strengths. Different learners will have some of these strengths. Now, while it's difficult to cater for students that have different ways of learning and different strengths and challenges, because all students are different, and this is what I said at the beginning, to remember this, all our students are different. So it's difficult, but if we include lots of variety in the types of activities that we have students do, and if possible, we can give them some choice, then at least every student will have something that they can feel that they're good at in our lessons, and that's important. Okay, so in this part, I'm aware of time, so I'm going to speed up a bit. We're going to look at some specific strategies that will hopefully make your classroom activities better for everyone. So going back to working memory, we need to break things down into small parts. So if you have a text, you can break that up into sections. If you have an audio, a listening, you can pause it at different moments just to break it up. Connecting to prior knowledge. I think we do this anyway as teachers, but it's really important to help students make connections between what they already know and what they're learning. So give lots of opportunities to review vocabulary or grammar or whatever it is, or give them opportunities to access things that they've already learned. And that brings me on to the next one, which is frequent review. So we know we need to hear and see a word or a phrase several times before we can remember it. So we need to build spaced repetition into our curriculum. And we can do this in lots of different ways. We can build review into everything that we do by asking questions or using pictures, for example. And in the Story Garden, every unit has beautiful artwork in the unit opener, particularly in the higher levels where it's more detailed. So you can use this to review language that students already know before you start the new unit. And that way it will be more accessible. This language will be more accessible to learners and less demanding on their working memory. Visual aids are also useful. So this could be mind maps, posters, flashcards, graphic organizers, and things like that. Like this one, also from Story Garden 6. And you can see that this one also has, I know it's not very big, but it has some sentence starters, which again helps free up some working memory because students don't have to remember the whole sentence. So those are sentence frames. In this activity, also from Story Garden 6, we're giving students the opportunity to connect their prior knowledge about places and people and the weather, and we're reviewing vocabulary from previous levels. And the graphic organizer here, the boxes, help act as a visual aid, and it helps students remember what they need to write in each section, for example. For attention and focus, it's important to have routines so that students know what to expect. So even when you have a routine, it doesn't have to be the exact same thing every time. You can have a few different activities that you always use for different stages of the lesson. It's important to use short texts and activities too. So we can break them up, as I said before. Another thing you can do is display a lesson menu so students know what they're going to be doing at each stage of the lesson. And that if you have a look online, you can find some really beautiful, cute examples of lesson menus. Task cards can also be useful if students are working independently. So you can give them cards, and each card has one step or one activity on it. And it can just be a little bit easier for them than having a list of steps or activities. Organization, infographics and diagrams can help because they're usually, an infographic follows a path or it has numbers to help follow that sequence. Make sure your instructions are really clear and given in steps, not all at once. Task cards I mentioned before, but I was going to mention a tip is if you do give students cards, you can, I don't know if you can see this here, you can punch a hole into the corner and just tie it with a little bit of string. And that way they just flip the card over and they don't lose it because, again, keeping lots of cards can be problematic for some students. Diaries, if they have school diaries, make use of these. And one thing that I was going to mention was that Story Garden has the activity book and the student book in one, and this helps with organisation because students don't have to be swapping from student's book to the activity book and vice versa. So it's all in one book. They can use a bookmark to remember where they are in each book and quickly flip to the other one. In terms of time management, visual timers that help students know how much time they have left, and time cues, so tell them how much time they've got left. Having a lesson menu, I mentioned before. Give students extra time if they need it. Or maybe they don't need to do all of the questions in an activity. Maybe they could just do half of the questions, maybe do the even numbered questions, 2, 4, 6, 8, for example, if they're going to struggle with time. Speed of processing, finally, they're similar to the ideas we've mentioned before, but giving students lots of thinking time to process the information, giving them cues, checking concepts, checking they know what to do, presenting information in different ways, making sure activities are short, giving them extra time as well, as I mentioned before. And finally, focus on quality rather than quantity. It's not about how much they do or how many questions they do, it's about how they do them. So, oh, it's not moving on to the next slide. Going back to this list of strengths very quickly, thinking about how we can include these in our lessons. Here are a couple of activities from the Story Garden. So in the top one, students have to design a toy using recycled materials and then present it to the class. So here they're using their creative thinking skills and their problem-solving skills as they think about what they could make from the recycled rubbish that they have at home, like milk cartons and bottle tops and yogurt pots and things like that. And they'll also need verbal communication skills as they share this and present it to the class, or as they discuss things together. In the activity at the bottom, they have to design an invention that solves a problem for someone. So again, this requires creative thinking and problem-solving skills, but also it requires empathy as they consider what problems other people might have and how they can help them. We can easily include this type of activity in any unit of work. And these problem-solving activities help all learners develop skills that they will need in the future, as well as providing a connection with the real world, which makes their learning meaningful. They have a real reason for learning. Okay, so in the final part of this webinar, I'm briefly going to talk about the heart and mind approach, which is the central idea behind the Story Garden. So the course is based around well-known stories, including fairy tales and classics from Little Red Riding Hood in level 1 all the way up to the Time Machine in level 6. And these stories provide a connection between the English language and the students' lives and their imaginations. And the cognitive and the emotional aspects of learning are linked. And I think that stories allow us to explore both of these things. The artwork in the Story Garden is one of my favorite things. It sparks curiosity about the story that they're going to look at, and it just gets them wondering about what they will be learning. And these beautiful pictures inspire creativity, and students can spend time exploring them because there's lots of details here and using their imaginations. And again, as I said before, you can review lots of existing language with this artwork. The stories and the songs appeal to our emotions, and we weren't sure whether to include songs in level 6 of the Story Garden because the students are getting a bit older, but we decided that it would be a shame not to include them. And actually, music provides another layer to learning that can really help some students learn. So we've attempted to link the music with the story context and the theme, so it's all tied together. And finally, connecting what students are learning with their lives, their own lives, is really important in the inclusive classroom. Students with learning differences may struggle with English, especially if your methodology is more on the traditional side. In fact, and I have to say that I disagree with this, I once heard an expert in dyslexia here in Spain say that he wouldn't recommend that dyslexic students study a foreign language. And I don't agree with that at all. I think that he's probably basing it on reading and writing skills, which are a part of learning a language, but not the only part. And there's absolutely no reason why a student with dyslexia or autism or any other learning difference can't learn a second language. What needs to change is our approach and attitude towards teaching students. Connecting with students and helping them make connections between the language they're learning and their lives are the first steps. And we're giving them a reason for learning English, and we're also showing them what they can do. And this is what we attempt to do with the real tasks that we've got in the Story Garden. And they encourage students to solve a real world problem. And these activities foster a range of skills like collaboration and problem solving and critical thinking and creativity. Some of them also foster empathy, which is an essential ingredient in the inclusive classroom. So again, these go back to those skills that students have. So finally, I want to just say that in the inclusive classroom, we mustn't give too much importance to the language, so the vocabulary and the grammar and the pronunciation. It is important, of course, we are English teachers, but we also need to celebrate the other skills that students have and give them opportunities to display these other skills too. So going back to the title of this webinar, Fostering Inclusion in the English Language Classroom, a few final thoughts that I want to add is we need to be flexible. We need to remember that every student learns in a different way and that one single way is not going to work for everybody. So we need to be a flexible teacher, willing to adapt what we do and how to do it. We need to also make it real and show how what students are learning connects with their real lives. We need to support independence. It can be tempting to provide lots of support and reduce the demand on learners, but all learners need to be challenged. We need to support them to become independent learners. So we need to try to discover, well, help them discover actually what works for them and encourage them to take responsibility for their learning. And finally, well, not finally, almost finally, develop a positive classroom environment. It's really important. We need to make sure that everyone understands that we are different but also the same, and that our brains all work in different ways. So we can create that supportive atmosphere. And finally, celebrate neurodiversity, because having all these differences makes our classroom more interesting. Having learners with different skills means that we have a diverse group of students who can all learn from each other and who together can do really amazing things. So I know I've gone on for a bit too long there, but we do have a few minutes for questions. So Sylvia, are there any questions in the chat? Did people have some questions that maybe I could try to answer?
Hi, Michelle. Yes, thank you. I've already shared with you a few comments / questions. Maybe take a look.
Okay.
But I've got other questions here with me. So I can start with one.
Look.
Okay.
I'll have a quick look.
I'll encourage teachers, in the meantime, I'll encourage teachers to write down any other questions they might have.
Yes, feel free. And I don't know if there's any way, if people have questions afterwards, whether they can, I can reply to them somewhere, or even, I don't know if we can do it through ELi, but if not, people can find me, you know, or email me even. I'm happy to try and answer any questions. So don't you believe that they should also make an effort which could be beneficial in terms of trying and overcoming their difficulties? Yes, I mean, this goes back to what I just said right at the end about supporting them to become more independent. Yes, we can help them by giving them more choice, perhaps, and we don't want what we don't want is for them to have to do activities that they struggle with all the time. But of course, they are going to have to do these activities at some point. They are going to have to learn to read and write, etc. So we need to support them with that. But I think for me, the first thing we need to do is to make sure that they feel that the classroom is a place where they belong and they can learn English. And if they struggle with everything, that's probably not going to happen. But yes, definitely support them to become independent, to overcome their difficulties, and help them find ways in which they can overcome those difficulties, things that work for them, which might not be the same as what works for somebody else. there's a question, or I'm not sure it's a question. I always ask them to re-explain what they're supposed to be doing at home on their own, just to be sure they understand well and to encourage them to complete tasks. Do you agree? Yes. So I think this is useful also in the classroom, not just when they're at home. Whenever students are going to be doing an activity, whether it's individually or in pairs or in groups, having them explain what they have to do is really useful. And it doesn't have to be explain, actually. Maybe they can demonstrate or find another way of showing that they know what they have to do. Are there any more questions?
I've got them here with me. For example, there's one about classroom management. So nobody in my classroom wants to work with the learners with learning differences, with learning difficulties. What can I do? What?
Okay, yes. Well, it is challenging, but it's all about raising awareness, I think, and building community in the classroom. So we need to show all of our students that we all have different skills. I said earlier about giving students opportunities to display the different skills that they have. This is why it's so important, so that other students can see that they have those skills, and we can highlight these skills by praising them. So if you have a student that struggles with a particular type of activity, for example, reading, but they do something else very well, we need to praise them for that and in front of the others. So saying, oh, Louisa made this amazing mind map. Look how well she connects the ideas, yeah? And do these kind of things just to show students that, okay, this person struggles with this activity, but look what they can do. And everybody's going to struggle with something anyway. You know, no student is brilliant at everything. So it's about just showcasing that. And also, when you're getting students to work in groups, try to mix up the groups so that each group has students with different skills. And then you can assign each student a role so that they're doing something that they're good at. So, for example, don't give a dyslexic student the role of note taker, because they're going to struggle with that, and the others in the group will see that they struggle. So give them the role of ideas generator, for example, and somebody who's good at writing can take notes. And that way, everyone in the group can see that each and every individual in that group has something that they can, you know, bring to the table. And you know, it's important, if you have students with learning differences or disabilities, it's important for everyone to see the person behind that and not just think, oh, that person isn't very good at reading, that person has this behavioral problem, whatever. No, think about them as a person, do activities where they get to know each other and they can find things they have in common with each other, because this can really help, I think, create those relationships, and that's what it's all about. I know we've got 1 minute left, so I'm going to stop now. But yes, build community as much as you can, get students working together, mix them up, and I think that's the best strategy.
Okay. If you like, we got still time for another question. If you
okay. Yes.
So my students' English level of English is low. How can I get them to do critical thinking and creative activities? So I can see here there was lots of empathy, I think, shown by teachers in their comments during this session. But I can see the questions actually are asked and from a practical point of view, because then they have to manage a classroom with different pupils, of course.
I think you can get students to do critical thinking activities or creative activities even with a low level of English, and we can do it with very young children as well. So if you've ever taught very young learners, pre-primary, you can get them to do these types of activities. They don't have to do everything in English, I think, is my my first answer to that. I think for me, with teaching children, we shouldn't be demanding that they do everything in English. It's just not practical, really. We don't want to limit their thinking to their level of English, because that would mean, you know, they're doing very basic things all the time. So what we can do is we can help them express what they want to say in English, in language that's appropriate to their age and level. We can give them sentence frames to complete, so part sentences. We can have them answer by using drawings or diagrams or something more visual. It doesn't always have to be, you know, productive language speaking and listening. So I think we can do lots of interesting activities with students of all levels and age.
Thank you. So I just wanted to to thank you, Michelle. Thank you for this, very useful and practical session. I'd like to thank all the teachers, because I really saw lots of passion about their role and their the task. Very important. So just remember to download the handout put together by Michelle. So remember to do it now, just before we close the session. And well, for further information, browse our website edionline.com, or to find out more about the Story Garden, the course book mentioned by Michelle, and to which actually she gave a big contribution to level 6 in particular. Thank you, Michelle. Go on edionline.com/thestorygarden. So, well, thanks everyone. Thanks, Michelle, again. And I'll see you again next week. We will be hosting Jane Cadwallader for for another live session about graded readers among young learners. So thank you and bye-bye all. Bye, Michelle. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for coming.